I'm Finn. I want to be in the camera, and I hate books.
'Cause you're a monster.
'Cause I'm a monster.
Hey guys, it's Tori, and today I'm going to be talking about my favorite characters out of the books I read in 2019. Characters are, I wouldn't say they necessarily make or break a book, because there's a lot of these books that are going to be on my favorites for the year, so it definitely helps, but there are several that aren't necessarily my favorite books, but they do have characters I really love. And then there's some of my favorite books of the year that don't include a character that I really fell in love with. I definitely obviously have to like the characters in some way, whether that be I love to hate them or whatever, in order for me to really enjoy a story. I've been trying to film this for a few hours, but my darling cousin Finn was over, which I should have included a clip from him early on, but he just was a camera hog and he wanted me to film, but he kept interrupting, so it wasn't very efficient. So anyway, he just left though, so let's just, like I said, get into this video. So the first character I'm going to talk about is Ciri from Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. She is the main character, one of the main characters in this. There are three main points of view that we follow: Ciri, her sister Vivenna, and Lightsong, as well as a few chapters from a man named Basher. And Ciri I just fell in love with because I felt like she followed that trope of, you know, the wild princess who doesn't like being held back by the confines of society and whatever, and likes to go horseback riding and be adventurous and all that stuff. But I really like the way Brandon Sanderson developed her character. I found her to be very interesting because I've always liked that trope, but something that goes along with that trope that I don't love so much is a lack of care for responsibility, and like this like whininess almost that's like, oh, I don't want to be forced to do things I don't want to do, but like she's in a position of power and she needs to care because it's not just about her. And so I found that even though she had that wildness to her, she reaches this point very early on where she recognizes she does have responsibilities now and she does need to step up a little bit, and she's willing to do that. But in her own way, she still has a unique style about it, but she still recognizes that responsibility, and I really appreciated that. Next, I have Helen Graham from the Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Brontë. I love Helen Graham. She's probably my favorite out of all of these, if I'm being honest. I don't have these in any particular order, but I do really love Helen Graham. I admire her so much. She has this moral compass that, you know, I could see people being like, oh, it's just the ideal woman, like she's a very moral person and very goody-goody and does what's right, but she still goes against society, and she has a relationship with God without basing her belief and knowledge of God on what the clergy say, if that makes sense. Like, she's willing to develop her own relationship with God, not just through the church, and I really respect that, and she prioritizes that over everything else, and it enables her to have healthier relationships and recognize when some of her relationships aren't healthy because she has that relationship with God, if that makes sense. And I just really admire her a lot. Even if you're not religious, I think just having those morals and those beliefs that you hold firm to, whatever it is very admirable. So I love her. I also think that I can just relate to her kind of strength better than I can to more of the like fierce kick butt heroines that are in most books nowadays. I just appreciate her quiet courage, and I want to emulate that in my own life. Next is Long John Silver from Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. I loved this character before because I had seen Treasure Planet and I found his relationship with Jim Hawkins interesting, but now that I'm older, I'm able to appreciate his grayness of character so much more. He's so much like Jack Sparrow. Like, I'm sure Jack Sparrow was based heavily on him because he just does whatever's best for him, and he doesn't really care about other people, but he does to some extent, but he still prioritizes himself usually over everybody else, and I find him fascinating, and I think there's a huge debate over whether he actually cares about Jim. Treasure Planet makes it seem like yes, he very much does, but it's harder to tell in this, and personally I would say he does. I still just think he prioritizes himself over Jim, but I do see that kind of relationship there, and I just find it fascinating. Next, we have a couple of Thomas Hardy novels. So the first one, technically, I have 2 characters in that I really like, but I figured I'd just combine it as one so that we could keep it a top 10. And that is Two on a Tower by Thomas Hardy. I really like both Viviette Constantine and Swithin St. Cleeve, the 2 main characters in the story, a lot. Swithin I enjoyed because of just his naivete, and he's just so sweet, and he just does not read body language or social conventions very well at all, and that's kind of the point, because it's talking about how young he is compared to her. Meanwhile, Viviette, I wasn't super into her character throughout, like she didn't really hold my attention, but by the end I kind of realized how deep her character really is. The story seems very almost frivolous and just like a fun little story until you get to the end, and then you realize the depth behind a lot of what was going on because of Viviette's character, because of the past that we don't really get much information on, but you can tell it's had a real effect on her, and it kind of comes to a climax by the end because of everything else that happens in this book, and it's really heartbreaking, but I really like, she's a character that's really stuck with me, even more than Swithin, to be honest. I still love Swithin, but as I've continued to think about this book, it's just really had an impact on me, which I didn't expect from it, because I don't know, when I finished it, I didn't really know how to feel, but again, the more I've thought about it, the more I've enjoyed it and appreciated the depth Hardy snuck in without making it super obvious, and I just really liked it. Next, for my other Hardy character of the year, Ethelberta, but from The Hand of Ethelberta by Thomas Hardy. I love Ethelberta so much. She's another one that's just so fascinating. She's fascinating because for a long time I wasn't sure how I felt about her, because I didn't know what she wanted. Like, I wasn't sure what her motivations were. It was really hard to get a grip on her character, and I realized partway through the story that it was because she didn't even know what she wanted. She was just kind of going along and kind of doing what she wanted, but kind of doing what her family wanted, but she didn't really know what she wanted in the end. And I think even though the ending is kind of sad, she ended up getting close to what she was wanting. She was able to have her household and feel a little bit more in charge, and I think that's kind of what she wanted. She wanted to feel more in control of her life. And she was just a fascinating character to continue to think about, similar to Viviette, just recognizing more and more about her and her depth of character. Next, I have Vida Winter from the 13th Tale. This is the story about Vida Winter, who is this famous author. She has never really told the truth about her past. She's made stuff up. Every interview she has, she tells a different story, and it's become kind of this thing with her, but she finally decides before she dies she wants to tell the truth. And so it's all about her, and she's just such an interesting person because she's one of those characters where she has so much to her and so much trauma in her past and is a fascinating person in and of herself, but she hides herself, and she hides herself from herself even. She doesn't want to face the realities of who she really is. So exploring her past at the end of her life is fascinating, and I just found her character to be very intriguing. Up next, we have Agnieszka, I believe is how you say it, from Uprooted by Naomi Novik. I just really liked Agnieszka for a similar reason as to Ciri from Warbreaker. I just found Agnieszka to be, she kind of had a wild side to her, but she also recognized responsibility, similar to Ciri. And I also just loved her play on Baba Yaga, the witch that lives in the woods. Just her bringing that character a little bit more to life. This story does in general, but she kind of has some qualities of Baba Yaga, and I just loved it so much, and I just love her. On the inside, I feel like I have like some witchiness in me, so I just appreciate her. Alright, down to the last couple. Oh, I forgot one. Up next is a character I knew I loved because I had seen an adaptation of this before, but I didn't know how much until I read the book, and that is Jean Valjean from Les Misérables. He's just such an incredible person, and his development over time, I just feel like the representation of someone who has lived a bad life and has made bad choices and been transformed from a relatively good person into a not good person, into someone who despises the world, and then to see him transform back because of just some small, simple actions into this good person, and even better than before, is so representative of life, of just how we all go through those ups and downs where sometimes we are a lot more selfish than we should be, and we make bad choices, and then we're able to come out of it. I think sometimes nowadays it's such a thing to accept you for who you are, which I think is really important, but I also think that we should always be trying to become better people. Like, I would hate to know that I'm stuck where I am, and I'm like, I want to become a more loving person. I want to love people better, and I want to be kinder. I'm not saying I'm mean or a horrible person, but I definitely know I can do better, and I just feel like Jean Valjean's representation of that transition of becoming is so amazing, and I loved a lot of characters in this, but Jean Valjean, I appreciate that he is the main character because I love him very, very much. For my last modern book, I have one more classic after this, but for my last modern book, I have here Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson, and the character I want to discuss is Renarin. I liked Renarin in the first couple of books, but he just wasn't, you're not in his head as much as the other characters, and so it was harder for me to connect with him. And he just seemed like this little weakling off to the side that you just kind of felt bad for, but I felt like in this one, his character really gained more depth, and I was able to see more into who he was as a person, and I really enjoyed that. I always love Kaladin a lot, and I actually appreciated Dalinar more in this book than I have in the past, so definitely gained more appreciation for those characters, but in this book I found Renarin I actually started to care about and want to know more about. So, and the last character I'm going to talk about, and my last classic for this list, is Count Fosco from The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. Count Fosco is the mustache-twirling villain of the story. You figure that out pretty early on, so I don't feel like that's a spoiler, but he is just so creepy. He makes you uncomfortable the moment he's on the page, and the whole time you get more and more uncomfortable with him, because whereas there's kind of some other villains involved, you kind of are able to get a sense of their purpose and their motivations and what they're trying to do a little bit earlier on, but for him, it took forever to figure out what his deal was, what his thing was, and he was just so scary. I really liked Marion as well, and I was going to add her to this list, but I ended up I just like Count Fosco. I love how evil and scary he is. I think Marion's a really interesting character, but especially with the list I've created, I feel like Count Fosco is different from most of the other characters in this, especially because one thing that really interests me about him is his strange, like, affection for Marion, which makes him even more creepy. That's why I love this so much. I love him so much, is he just has this added depth that even by the end you don't fully understand who he is and what his motivations are. Okay, so that is it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will be back this weekend with another video. Bye! What city do you want to go to?
London! Was Big Ben actually under construction?
Yes, it was. It was very sad.
If it ran 3 times, it would be 3 o'clock. If it ran 6 times, it would be 6 o'clock. If it ran 10 times, it would be 10 o'clock.
Yep.
And if it ran 100 times, then it would be broken.
Yes, that is true.